Hello and welcome to Wine Festival Online 2020.
We're Susie and Peter, we're Masters of Wine, co-founders of Wine Festival Winchester, which this year by magic has transformed into Wine Festival Online.
It has indeed. Now what have we got coming up? Oh yeah, it's our pleasure. It is our pleasure to introduce Quentin Sadler, who will be talking about the fine wines of Louis Jadot in Burgundy, which he describes, Louis Jadot, as one of the greatest and most famous Burgundy houses. They are certainly very famous. I'm sure most of you have heard of them.
Yeah, they are, and many of you will have tasted them at the festival before. Now, there's some pretty cool maps and graphics, so respect, Quentin, in this one coming up. It's quite an educational session,
It is,
I think,
yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
But to be honest, that works quite well for Burgundy, which does take a bit of explaining. And
A bit
even
of
if
understanding.
even if you know Burgundy, it's nice just to recap on some of the key details, just to get the context for each of the wines.
Absolutely. So we've got a Chablis in there. We've got a Premier Cru white wine. Is it Premier Cru white?
Bernard Vergelès
Yes,
is the
Bernard
white.
Vergelès.
Then we go on to the
The
Bourgogne Côte d'Or, which is nice to try
Yeah.
a relatively new appellation, which Quentin explained.
And he's got two whites, two reds.
And we've got Premier Cru, so there's a Beaune Premier Cru
That's
to
the
finish
Premier
with.
Cru.
So we finish on a posh note.
We do indeed. Anyway, we'd like to say thank you at this point to our sponsors, particularly our headline sponsor, Rathbones. Now, this video will be live after you've watched it now, so you can always catch up on any bits that you've missed. And of course, there is another masterclass coming after it, so please stay tuned. We want everybody to stay with us for the whole day for lots of masterclass fun.
Stay with us forever. If you like the wines, please do buy them as well. They are fantastic. We do also have some competitions running today for wonderful wine prizes. There's a tasting selfie competition and also a sharp eyes competition for people who want to match up details and where they appear in the videos. All the details are on the website.
There might be one in this video.
Well,
Watch out for
I
it.
think there is.
Now, if you have any problems watching the videos, then just email us on hello@thewinefestival.co.uk, or you can contact us via social media, and all the details for that are on our website.
So enjoy the Louis Jadot masterclass with Quentin Sadler.
Hello, my name's Quentin Sadler. I'm a wine writer and wine educator, and I'm with you to talk about the wines of Maison Louis Jadot. Louis Jadot is one of the greatest and most famous Burgundy houses. And the Jadot family started owning vineyards and making wine in the early 19th century, but it was not until 1859 when Louis Henri Denis Jadot founded, formally anyway, the company that we now call Maison Louis Jadot. That was in Beaune, which is the wine capital of Burgundy, the very beautiful city of Beaune, one of my favourite places to visit. And initially that's where most of their vineyards were. They still own a lot of vineyards there, but over the centuries, they've expanded into the other districts of Burgundy, and now they have large vineyard holdings in Beaujolais, in the Makone, Côte Chalonnaise even, as well as the Côte d'Or. They've even expanded overseas and now have an estate in the United States, in Oregon, where they craft some spectacularly good Pinot Noir from fruit grown there. They are a very respected company, widely regarded as one of the great Burgundy houses. So I hope you're going to enjoy our tasting together. Let's start our tasting with one of the most famous white Burgundies of all, Chablis. Our example is, of course, the 2019 Chablis Cellier de la Sablière. I love Chablis. I love everything about Chablis. And I think Jadot make a great example of Chablis. If you look at it, it's crystal clear with that lovely sort of creamy lemon yellow colour that I find really appealing. The nose, when you stick your nose in, it's surprisingly lifted. And that's partly because I think 2019 was an abnormally hot year, so the fruit was very ripe, so you've got that lift to it. But there are those classic lemony citrus notes, as well as white flowers like jasmine and acacia, But there's also green apple and a little bit of white peach as well, giving a touch more succulence and weight to the aroma. So give it a taste. The palate is rounded. That ripeness again from the 2019 vintage. There's some creaminess as well as little touches of peach, melon and ripe apple. Not just the green apple we were smelling, all vying for your attention on the palate. Even though it is abnormally soft and ripe, it's all still held together by Chablis' hallmark high acidity and that lovely touch of stony minerality on the finish. Those two things make it really refreshing, the acidity and the minerality. For me, Chablis is all about being fresh and lithe and zingy and mineral, and all that comes through here despite the hot conditions. The great majority of white Burgundy, of course, is made from Chardonnay. Almost all of it, in fact. There are some exceptions, but not many. And this is pure Chardonnay. There's no oak here, though. Up in Chablis, it's not an oaked style. And interestingly, the locals call Chardonnay Beaune Noir because they regarded it historically as an interloper from Beaune. And of course, Beaune is where Louis Jadot are based. So I always find that slightly amusing. So that's our first wine, our aperitif wine, if you like. And that's apt because it works brilliantly as an aperitif. It's good before a meal with nothing, or with some nibbles, or with a shellfish starter, or a salmon mousse, or smoked salmon, or something like that. Locally, they drink Chablis with gougères, which are these really delicious cheesy choux pastry puffs. They're quite fantastic, very Moorish, I warn you. So, hope you enjoyed that wine. I rather naughtily didn't spit it out. But hey, I'm not driving anywhere. I don't know about you. For a lot of people, Burgundy seems very complex at first. And more than a little frightening. There's a lot of names. There's a lot of appellations in Burgundy, in a relatively small area. But really, it's just a matter of geography. So I think it's probably worth taking a few minutes to look at a map and just to see where Burgundy is and how it's constructed. So let's do that now. As you can see from the map, Burgundy is in the centre of eastern France. It's landlocked and has a continental climate, which is why the wines are richer than those from further north, but lighter than those produced to the south. Chablis comes from the extreme north of Burgundy and is quite removed from the rest of the region. In fact, it's closer to Champagne and Sancerre than it is to Beaune, and that's why Chablis is produced in a light, fresh style that's best drunk young. The deep south of Burgundy is the Beaujolais region, an area famous for producing light, fresh and juicy red wines from the Gamay grape. Louis Jadot have considerable vineyards here, including the famous Château des Jacques in Moulins-en-Vent. To the north of Beaujolais is the Makone District, named for the town of Makone. Although some reds are made here, it's most famous for white wines like Beaujolais Villages, which is fruity and appealing, while Puy is the most complex and famous white wine from this area. Just south of Dijon, we come to the Côte d'Or. This is a limestone slope that faces east and slightly south and goes all the way from here down to Marange, south of the city of Beaune, and it's home to most of the really famous wines of Burgundy. The Côte d'Or is subdivided into two districts. In the north, there's the Côte de Nuit, which produces almost only red wines and are the richest styles in Burgundy. Famous villages here include Gevrey-Chambertin and Nuit-Saint-Georges. The southern part of the Côte d'Or is called the Côte de Beaune and is centred on the beautiful medieval city of Beaune. This district makes both red and white wines. All the most famous white wine villages are here, places like Maison and Montrachet, whilst the famous red wines of the Côte de Beaune include Beaune itself and Pommard and Volnay. To the south of the Côte de Beaune, we have the Côte Chalonnaise, named for the town of Chalon-sur-Saône. This isn't as concentrated a wine area as the Côte d'Or, but there are some very good red wines and white wines produced in villages like Mercury, Givry and Ruy, as well as white wines in Montagny and Bouzeron. Okay, so that's a little learning out of the way. Let's get back to the tasting. So our second wine is Louis Jadot's Pinot Noir Clos de la Croix de Pierre, which is a single vineyard wine. A clos is an enclosed vineyard, a walled vineyard. And this wine comes from a single site, or as the French call it, a lieu dit, which is on the outskirts of the village of Pinot, which is just north of the hill of Coton, up on the top edge of the Côte de Beaune, just before it transforms into the Côte de Nuit. And this particular wine, if you look at the label, it's always worth looking at labels closely, you'll see on the label it says Domaine Louis Jadot. And that means that this particular wine, the vineyard is entirely owned by the Louis Jadot company. Sometimes on the labels there you'll see Domaine des Héritières Louis Jadot, and that means the vineyards are owned by the Jadot family. And there's some other domain holdings you'll see on their labels as well, because they have such extensive portfolio of vineyards around the region. So when you look at this wine, you should notice that it looks darker, a little richer, more golden. And of course, there's at least two reasons for that. One is it's 3 years older, so we're actually looking at the age in the wine. The other thing is, and you'll know this as soon as you smell it, is that this wine is barrel fermented and barrel aged as well. And the fact that it's aged in a barrel means oxygen can get in through the grain of the wood, and that's what helps make the wine darker and richer. So if you give it a little tiny swirl, not too much, and then stick your nose in, it is those oak aromas that are very much to the fore. They're delicate, but they are there. And you've got that smoke and toast and toasted almonds and flaky pastry as well. This wine will have been aged in barrel, but on the lees. And the lees are the dead yeast cells left over from the fermentation. And if you age your wine on those lees, that yeast sediment, it gives you a richer and more complex wine. If you stir the lees, it also gives you a creamy texture, and that is what they will have done on this wine. The French call that bâtonnage. There's also, as well as those characters, the oak, there's lovely fruit here as well. There's ripe yellow peach, there's some melon, dessert apple, even some green fig notes. 2016 was a good vintage. It was difficult, but it was good. Classic, they say. Not too hot, not too cold. And I think the quality of the vintage shows in the fruit concentration, on the aroma and on the palate when we get to that. So give it a taste. I love white Burgundy, and I think this shows why I'm right to love white Burgundy. It's round, it's rich, it's supple. You can feel it coating the inside of your mouth. It's a textured wine in a way that the Chablis was not. And it's got lovely sort of little delicate nibbles of spice on your palate. There's it's toasty and nutty, but there's cinnamon and clove and cardamom there as well. And as I said, lots of fruit concentration. There's ripe apple, there's yellow peach, but there is also sort of keeping it all in check, if you like, this pure lemon acidity running through it, and a touch of that mineral quality. It's a sort of stony feel on the finish. And it's a long finish as well. And you've got all those things going on. You've got that stony minerality. You've got that precise linear acidity. You've got the succulence and the softness of the fruit. And you've got that spicy, toasty, smoky quality from the oak. So you've got lovely things going on, powering the finish on this wine. I think it would be absolutely wonderful with a grilled Dover sole, or a bit of turbot with some beurre blanc, or a luxurious fish pie. It's a very me wine, this. I hope you enjoyed it too. I'll take one more sip and then let's move on to the reds. Okay, so for our red wines, we're going to concentrate on the real heartland of Burgundy, the Côte d'Or. Louis Jadot, of course, are based in the Côte d'Or. They're based in the beautiful medieval city of Beaune, one of the best wine destinations to visit. If you haven't been, I highly recommend, as soon as COVID's over, go to Beaune. You won't regret it. And our first red is a really exciting addition to the Louis Jadot portfolio. It's only the second release because the appellation was only created 2 years ago. And this is the Bourgogne Côte d'Or 2018. And of course, that means that the fruit exclusively comes from the Côte d'Or area. And if you remember from our map, Côte d'Or is made in two zones. You've got the Côte de Nuit in the north, which produces the richer styles of Pinot Noir, and the Côte de Beaune in the south around Beaune, which produces the lighter, more savoury styles of Pinot Noir. And almost all the famous red wine villages of Burgundy are in the Côte d'Or. So the wine we've got in front of us is pure Pinot Noir, hand-harvested, destemmed, and they do that in order to keep the tannins silky and suave and seductive, the 3 S's. The wine was then aged in vat and in barrel, a combination of the two. You get more of an oak effect from barrels than you do from vats, so they don't want too much oak to dominate. So it aged in a mixture of barrels and vats for 18 months before release. This is a lovely wine. It's very, very accessible, I think. It's very, very seductive. And the reason for that is it's a 2018, which was a hot vintage, and it produced wines with generous fruit as a consequence of all that heat and ripeness. I really like this. When you give it look at the colour, it's so bright, isn't it? So bright and appealing. Really bright ruby, which sort of emphasises its youth as well. And the nose is bright too. When you stick your nose in there, there's loads and loads of fresh raspberries, fresh red cherry, little touch of strawberry, that slightly deeper note. And there's a little bit of those just around the edges, those savoury, earthy notes as well, and a little crack of black pepper, which will come, and smoke, which will come from the oak. When you give it a taste, the palate is very supple, very suave, with gorgeous ripe fruit. It's just bursting with ripe cherries, strawberries, raspberries, and it's got some sappy wood character as well, and soft oaky spice there too. I'm just totally in love with the silky mouthfeel. It just flows across the palate in a lovely, silky, refined kind of way. I would love to drink this with steak frite, or how about a duck breast with some dauphinoise potatoes? I think it would go beautifully with either of those. Oh, while we're on this wine, share the label with you. So this is a very unusual label for Louis Jadot. Their labels are usually very traditional and have kept much the same for the last 200 years or so. But this one is designed around a piece of artwork that was created by students at Central St Martin's College of Art and Design in London. And it's called A Tale of Terroir, and it depicts the three things that, the three elements that make this wine special. The soils of Burgundy, the landscape of Burgundy, and the climat, or the villages of Burgundy. So that's what that depicts. Okay. I hope you are enjoying the wine as much as me. I hope some of you have got some duck and dauphinoise to enjoy with it. If not, by the way, red Burgundy is fabulous with charcuterie. Have that with some terrine, some saucisson, and things like that, and you'll have a lovely dinner. So that's our first red. Let's move on to the next one now. Just before we do that, I realise I ought to explain a little bit about the hierarchy of Burgundy wines. The starting point for Burgundy wines is the regional wines, which are labelled as Bourgogne, and they can come from anywhere within the Burgundy wine region. Then we have the district wines. These are labelled with a more specific area of origin and are considered to be higher quality wines. Now we come to the commune wines. These are the wines of the villages and are amongst the most famous wines of Burgundy. These are made from vines that are grown around a specific village, like Gevrey-Chambertin, like Beaune, and that is the name of the appellation contrôlée that appears on the label. Within the communes, some vineyard sites are considered to be superior and are classified as being premier cru. These are wines that are more distinguished and often a lot more expensive than the village wines. They are labelled as being from the village and have the vineyard name on them, as well as the fact that they are classified as premier cru. Some sites are considered to be superior even to the premier cru vineyards, and these are classified as grand cru. Not all communes have grand cru vineyards. Gevrey-Chambertin does, for instance, where they have Le Chambertin and Chambertin Clos de Bez, amongst others. These are the most expensive of all Burgundy wines. Okay, so now we come to our final wine, I'm afraid, but it's something special. And it is Louis Jadot's 2012 Beaune Premier Cru Célébration. And this is a special cuvée which has been produced since 2009. So this is the third vintage of it, because it's 2012. And it was originally created to mark the 150th anniversary of the founding of Maison Louis Jadot in 1859. As I've mentioned before, Louis Jadot have quite extensive vineyard holdings around the city of Beaune, within the appellation of Beaune. And they particularly have Beaune Premier Cru vineyards. For all sorts of reasons, Beaune doesn't have any Grand Cru vineyards, but it has extensive Premier Cru. And Louis Jadot own lots of parcels of these. And the wine we're about to taste is a blend of 17 different parcels of Beaune Premier Cru, all owned by Louis Jadot. And it's hopefully going to be really expressive of what Beaune Premier Cru is all about and what it can do. There are some truly magnificent vineyard sites in this wine. If you look at it's another unusual label for Louis Jadot. That's their Bacchus head, the head of Bacchus, which is their symbol, their emblem. And in this version of it, it's got in the hair, it's got all the individual names of the Beaune Premier Cru plots that have been blended together to make this wine. So here we've got Clos des Ursule here. There we've got Les Boucherottes. Here we've got Les Tourents, for instance. We've got Les Aveux up here, Les Grèves and Les Sons there. So lots of vineyards have gone into this wine. They were vinified separately and then blended together, and the wine was aged for 18 months in barrels. Okay, so the wine is now 8 years old, and I think it's showing its age very, very gracefully indeed, which is quite remarkable given that it was a really difficult year. It was a really problematic year, 2012. Lots and lots of natural problems. But they've really pulled, I think, something special out of all those challenges. When you look at it, you'll see there's a little touch of orange to it. That's the beginning of the age showing. But when you sniff it, I think the age is surprisingly youthful, with plenty of red fruit, but also sort of creeping through and sort of coming through the wine. You've got those lovely sort of earthy little touches of leather and mushroom. Classically, we talk about forest floor for red Burgundy and for Pinot Noir, and that's what we're beginning to see here. So let's give it a taste. And I think the palate has got that lovely, classic Pinot Noir, dried red fruit sweetness. You know, it's like when you find little nuggets of dried raspberry in your muesli. You get that little of sweetness. Getting the same here. And it's really, I think, captivating and addictive. There's bright acidity too. So the wine feels very fresh as a consequence of the fruit and the acidity. There's even for me on the mid palate a little twist of blood orange, which I love in a red wine. Lots of raspberry, fleshy red plums too. And there's little touches of cinnamon and clove. There's coffee coming through from the oak aging. And the tannins are very silky, very refined. I would love to drink this with that Burgundian classic, Bœuf Bourguignon. I think it would be absolutely glorious with it, perhaps with some mashed potato as well. I love the finish on this. It goes on and on. And it really shows how well Pinot Noir can age, in fact. A really delicious and special wine. I hope you agree. So that's our tasting. I hope you've enjoyed the 4 wines I've shared with you from Maison Louis Jadot in Burgundy. I hope you've enjoyed seeing what Louis Jadot can do. And thank you very much for having me in your homes, and let's hope we get to meet in person next time. Cheers.